Our last and final speaker before the break will be Nathan Seward from Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Well, thank you, everyone. It really is an honor to be here today in front of you and to be representing the Gunnison Climate Working Group. As you're going to see, there's been a lot of hard work accomplished on the ground, and I'm just really honored to be part of this project, and I think you're going to find this very rewarding. I need to take just a second to also thank my co-author, co-presenter, Betsy Neely with the Nature Conservancy. Thank you. Betsy Neely with the Nature Conservancy. She has really been the leader that's been the glue of this project. She brought the Nature Conservancy down to the Gunnison Basin and got us to have this tough discussion on the potential impacts of a changing climate and what we might be able to do about it on the ground. So again, the Gunnison Basin Climate Working Group, it's a public-private partnership basically set up to help reduce the impacts of a changing climate. You can see it's very diverse, a lot of different moving parts. Of course, the Forest Service, BLM, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, all involved, and the private landowners we've been able to work with have been phenomenal. So, those of you that may not be super familiar with the Upper Gunnison Basin, we are a high elevation montane basin, roughly 2.3 million acres of land, 85% of that being public lands, with our elevations ranging from about 7,500 feet to just over 14,000 feet in elevation. So we have a diversity of vegetation, vegetative community types. The Gunnison Basin is well known for its big game populations, but more recently, the recognition of a unique avian species, the Gunnison sage-grouse, that was recognized in the year 2000, thanks to Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Dr. Jessica Young at Western State Colorado University's research. Unfortunately, though, the Gunnison Basin landscape, it's changing. We've seen a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit increase in our average temperatures over the past 50 years. This warming is expected to continue with longer and hotter heat waves in the summer. Our late season snowpack is likely to continue to decrease, which would cause the declines of river flow and our soil moisture. And then our droughts are expected to become hotter, more severe, and more frequent. And I'm sure as many of you can relate, the fire season is expected to continue to lengthen. So already from past anthropogenic activities, our mesic areas in the basin are already pretty impacted. You can see here we have some cattle trailing 2-track roads, which are further influencing the hydrology of this wet meadow system here. We have some hummocking here, and then ultimately what happens through this incision and down cutting, our water table drops. We get additional head cutting, and that water table will actually drop further and allow for these more xeric species to encroach. So the goal of the Gunnison Climate Working Group was to build this idea of resiliency back into the landscape. We wanted to restore the natural hydrology and ecological function of these wet meadow systems, specifically for Gunnison sage-grouse, which I know you heard about, provide those grocery stores that they need throughout the summer, and for other wildlife. These areas provide that critical winter range for our deer and elk herds. And then, of course, we wanted to help our ranching community, the folks that actually are deriving an income off the land. We wanted to help them better prepare for these changes. So how are we doing this? We're doing it through simple sticks and stones. We're following Bill Zedike's book, Let the Water Do the Work. I'd highly encourage you to pick up a copy. It's a great read, and it makes common sense. So we're doing this through different rock structures, log structures, so essentially the native materials that can be found on site sometimes. And we've started to use drift fences and then the plug and spread technique as well here more recently. So again, our goals as far as developing resiliency in the landscape, we're trying to get that stream channel reconnected to the floodplain, spread that water out, take away that erosive energy, get better water storage in those stream banks that have been artificially created through the down cutting, stabilize those head cuts, and then ultimately have the vegetation convert back to more of the native and diverse wetland plant species that should be there. And then the ultimate goal would be to augment the late season water flows coming out of these wet meadow systems. So the One Rock Dam, this is the most common structure that we're using. You can see here the purpose of this structure is to slow the water down, pull it up, get that water to saturate into the adjacent stream banks. And by holding that water longer, what we're doing is we're allowing that vegetation to respond. So later on in the summer, that grass is going to be nice and tall, providing that roughness to further slow down the water during the next precipitation event. Once that vegetation is established, the cycle continues. We get the settlement to settle out, aggradation, and what we can do is we're doing this naturally. I call it a natural process by slowing that water down. Once these structures are filled in, we can come back and add a second layer on top of that original structure. This is a much more natural approach compared to some of the gabion check dams you see out there in the landscape made out of large boulders, tires these days, which, you know, they're prone to failure. What happens is you get that 100-year event, a lot of water comes down, it cuts around that gabion check dam, and now you have this, you know, ugly structure left out there high and dry. So this is a series of photos. Thank you, Renee, for providing these, but this is a rock rundown. We built this back in August of 2013. You can see just after 1 year how the green line has already started to expand around that structure. Again, the grass is responding nicely here. And we were seeing essentially so much sedimentation settling out that we decided in the fall of 2015 to add a second layer of rock on these structures. So you can see here, this is the same structure. We've now expanded it a little bit wider, taller, and now you can see the additional green line, the expansion. By 2017, look at the amount of grass here. So that's really spreading the water, again, slowing it down and just retaining it longer through the season. In the spring of 2016, this is the same drainage, but I love this photo because you can see the structures up here, upstream of this one in the photo, how it's diverting the water, it's spreading it out across the meadow, and again, we're taking that erosive energy out, versus without these structures, we had a very narrow little ribbon of water flowing through this cutting and lowering that water table even deeper. So again, the benefit of these structures compared to like gabion check dams or the sheet metal check dams is, again, you get a more natural restoration and healing. Here's a One Rock Dam. Basically 4 growing seasons later, you can't even tell exactly where it is anymore. Another structure that we're using is the Media Luna. This is a structure that's specifically designed to spread the water again, depending upon the curvature of the structure. We're either spreading that water out in arrays, or we may want to actually bring that water together and concentrate it. What we're doing here in this particular situation is just upstream. We have a very narrow pinch point in the valley. We're using a media luna to spread that water back across the width of this meadow. The Zuni bowl, this is a rock structure that we're using to address head cuts. You can see here we had an active head cut, a lot of kind of erosion here along the adjacent stream banks. What's critical about this particular structure is you want to get those rocks flush with the upper top of the structure there. If you have it too high, what happens is the water will actually kind of back eddy, the roots are exposed to those plants, oxidation occurs, and then the erosion will happen, and that head cut will continue to advance upstream. But with the Zuni bowl, the water will come over that lip. It's water on water, so again, you're losing that energy, you're pulling it up, and then you use this in series with the one rock dam. Again, a nice trickling down effect, which ultimately reduces the advancement of that head cut. Here's an active head cut on Flat Top Mountain. The Forest Service first started taking photographs of this back in 1993. By 2013, they had documented that this head cut had moved approximately 60 feet. So we decided to use a slightly different structure, not the Zuni bowl, but a log and fabric step-down structure. These are green aspen that have been cut to length, and then geotextile fabric. And what we're doing is we're layering that fabric in those logs to create essentially a staircase, a trickle down for the water. Again, taking that pour over effect and that erosive energy out of the system. And then we're actually mimicking a one rock dam here with these green aspen so that we can get better settlement and deposition just upstream. As of last year, we successfully have prevented that head cut from advancing anymore. This is another structure. Commonly, when culverts are installed, culverts are gonna, again, it's a pinch point for that water. It speeds up the water coming out of the culvert, again, speeding up that erosive energy. What we've done is we took that culvert out, basically put down a layer of geotextile fabric, large rocks, another layer of geotextile fabric, medium rocks on top of that, another layer of geotextile, smaller rocks on top. And now that vehicle can still stay on its route, cross the meadow, but the energy is being dispersed over a wider surface area. We're not getting those ruts that are going to collect the water. Another additional benefit is on the upstream side. The low water crossing structure will also help that water spread out, pool up. During higher flows, though, that water can, of course, just flow over the top. Another simple technique we're using is the drift fence. So what we're having here is we've got cattle trailing between two different springs. We're using roughly 100-foot in length fence, high visibility, as you can see here. High visibility because we didn't want to create any kind of a collision hazard for sage grouse. But you can see just after a year later, what we've done is we've changed the pattern of those cattle so that they're now having to go up into the uplands versus being able to take that shortcut through the meadow between the two springs. And finally, just in the past couple of years, we've actually started to do more kind of dirt work. This is the plug and spread method. So this is a technique that Bill likes to use specifically in deeper in size channels. What we had here was about a 4 to 5 foot deep incision through our wet meadow. And what we're doing is we're using this little skid steer to actually create a plug down in the bottom of that incised channel. And we're borrowing that material for the plug in these two open bays here. So now when the water comes downstream, it runs into our plug, it's diverted to both sides, and what we're doing is we're re-watering the entire width of that wet meadow now. Compared to the rock structures, this is actually pretty economical. Essentially, we're just paying for the time of the dirt work. We don't have that additional cost of buying the rock material, hauling it in. Typically, you can do about 2 of these larger structures within a day with a trained contractor. I'm sorry. So this is Chance Gulch. This is another plug and spread treatment we just recently did in the fall of 2016. You can see here our plug. We now have our bay here that's filled with water. The stock pond was there already, but we had a series of braided channels over here from old roads, and the water would come down, get captured in those different channels and be spread out, but again, the water table was dropped so low that it wasn't really helping the persistence of these wet meadows here. You can see they were drying out, sagebrush was encroaching, and through a series of plug and spreads, we've been able to spread that water out, essentially irrigate more of that meadow, and we're actually killing the sagebrush back now just after 1 year. So some of our accomplishments between 2012 and 2013, we've been able to treat over 24 miles of streams, again across different land ownerships. We've treated 175 acres of music meadow, wetlands. We've benefited over 1,200 acres of riparian habitat and late brood-rearing habitat for the Gunnison sage grouse. We've worked now with over hundreds of wildland restoration volunteers and secured over $500,000 for this kind of work. And I think what I'm most pleased about is we now have NRCS on board as they've adopted these conservation practices so that these techniques and methods can be funded through Farm Bill funding. And then finally, we have been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they've essentially signed off on these habitat improvement techniques. So very minimal consultation needs to occur now for us to move forward with these kinds of projects. A few lessons learned is obviously watersheds, they don't recognize fences. We've been able to work again across land ownership, and that has really been key to the ultimate success of this project. Again, collaboration is key. Again, to reiterate, outreach, training is critical, and I find that really enjoyable when I get to work with youth and get them out on the ground and help them build a sense of a land ethic. Monitoring is critical. I hope you'll stick around after the break and catch the other half of the story, and because Renee Rondeau is going to do a fantastic job of showing you the vegetation response in these treatments. Finally, this should say don't underestimate the power and force of water in any system. These techniques during that first growing season, if you do get a monsoon rain, they are slightly susceptible to being washed out. We did have about a dozen structures 1 year wash out on us, and we had to come back that following year and rebuild them. So there is always maintenance. As I said, you can use these techniques, you can build upon them, you can add layers, but the benefits by doing it in a more natural method are numerous. So take the time, build it right the first time, and that will alleviate a lot of your headache. And then obviously not every pile of rocks is equal. You're really looking for that good angular rock, lots of sides to it. Rock cobble simply isn't going to work. It might be readily available for your needs, but you really need to get that good angular rock in order to fit these structures together perfectly. And if there's any time, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
We have time for one quick question.
I was wondering if you noticed any marked reduction in
Has there been any increase in wildfire reduction? You're saying as far as our habitat improvement work actually providing a buffer to slow down wildfire, correct? You know, we've been fortunate. We haven't had any large-scale wildfire in the Gunnison Basin down in the lower sagebrush steppe ecosystem. Where we have had wildfire is more where we had the mountain pine beetle, spruce beetle outbreaks where we have, you know, significant die-offs of our conifer forest. So, but again, I think these will be successful fire breaks. Absolutely. Thank you.